Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Agatha.
And I'm Peter.
There was a time when U.S. cinemas were flooded with examples of that most American of film genres, the Western. By the late 1990s, the genre had all but died out, despite a few efforts to bring it back, including the movie we're discussing today, which offers traditional Old West showdowns as crafted by one of the most unconventional genre filmmakers ever, the great Sam Raimi. So strap on your 6 guns and listen to the clock, because once we're done, the only ones left will be the quick and the dead.
This is my town! If you live to see the dawn, it's because I allow it. I decide who lives or who dies.
In a town called Redemption, death is a way of life. Some fight for money. Some fight for glory. But one stranger has come here, looking for something else.
I now declare the quick draw competition open. Anybody can challenge anybody.
Sign me up.
Sure must want to die young, miss.
She can play their game.
Want to play poker with me, little lady?
Looks like you're having a pretty good time playing with yourself.
She can beat their odds.
Did you ever kill anyone?
Sure.
I don't think you have.
But there's one thing she can't do.
Why are you really here? You're no gunfighter.
Forget the past.
String him up. Put him on a chair.
Some people deserve to die.
TriStar Pictures presents Sharon Stone.
I'm gonna kill you if I have to ride all the way to hell to do it.
Gene Hackman.
There's nothing on this earth that frightens me now. Nothing.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Hey, my face.
In a film by Sam Raimi. The Quick and the Dead. In this town, you're either one or the other.
The tiny desert town of Redemption suffers under the heel of rich, tyrannical outlaw John Herod, who holds an annual quick draw competition as a way of dealing with his various enemies. While the prize money attracts a colorful crew of sharpshooters and outlaws, for several players the game is personal. Herod's illegitimate son, a cocky young rogue known as the Kid, is out to prove himself to his father. Herod's former partner in crime, a reformed outlaw-turned-priest, is abducted and forced to participate, whether he wants to or not. But the most mysterious of all is a female gunslinger known as the Lady, whose vendetta against Herod will change Redemption forever. As usual, we'll be discussing The Quick and the Dead in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. The Quick and the Dead was released by Sony Pictures on February 10th, 1995, where it opened against Billy Madison and the US release of Shallow Grave. It opened at number 2. It was shot for a budget of $35 million and made $47 million at the box office, but this was considered a bomb at the time, especially given the star power with Sharon Stone and Gene Hackman behind it. For awards, it was nominated at the 1996 Saturn Awards for Best Actress for Sharon Stone, but she lost to Angela Bassett for Strange Days. Okay, what's everybody's first experiences with this movie?
Mine's very quick. It was actually for this. You thought that I had seen it a very long time ago and tried to convince me that I'd seen it, just like absolutely insisted. But then I did see it, and there's no way I would ever forget having seen this movie. I love it.
So my first experience was like 20 years ago. When I first started getting like really into movies and film and directors and stuff, Sam Raimi was the first filmmaker I really attached myself to. And I picked up a book about his films that came out in 2004. I looked it up just to double check. And it covered his entire filmography up through the first Spider-Man. And after reading that book, I then went back and watched all of his movies I hadn't seen, which was everything but the Evil Dead movies and Darkman at that point. And that's when I saw it. And I just immediately fell in love with it like I did most of his films.
I think this was the first Sam Raimi movie I saw on the big screen. It was right after I finally caught up with the Evil Dead movies. Like after Army of Darkness came out, then I saw the first Evil Dead and went through all of those. And I remember not very many people being in the movie theater at the time. And another one where I think a lot of people didn't quite know how to react to it while it played out on screen. But I loved it. I thought it was a ball. We had a ton of fun with it. And I've always been kind of disappointed that it didn't really catch on when it came out because it's so much fun. Just the idea of Sam Raimi doing a Western and applying all of his visual tricks to it. I mean, just how can you go wrong with that? So what's everybody's experiences with Westerns in general? Do you like the genre? Do you not like it?
I would have said years ago that I hated the genre, that I thought it was boring, but let's be honest, I had not seen more than probably one. So I was talking out of my ass. And you've actually introduced me to some Westerns. I've seen a few independently, and it's made me reconsider it as a genre. While there are distinctive elements of a Western, it's really just about the location and the land. And I really find that interesting.
How about for you, Peter?
I hate to say it, but I've never been a fan of Westerns. The ones that I like, I really, really like. And they're usually more contemporary ones or just weird ones. But the kind of classic, like John Wayne, Clint Eastwood Westerns of the old days, that's just never something that's appealed to me. I generally find them boring, although I do love the set design. I like the costumes. I like all the period stuff. I just don't find the movies all that compelling for the most part.
That's fair enough. When I was a kid, because there were so many Westerns, it didn't really interest me all that much because it always seemed like the same thing, sort of those John Wayne ones where he would just make a ton of them, and it's like the market was just flooded with them. Once I started working in a video store and became resolved to check out all the classics, I started seeing some of the old ones like High Noon and Shane and Stagecoach and so forth, and definitely grew to appreciate them. But yeah, the more contemporary ones are kind of the ones I latched onto first, like Silverado, like this, like Unforgiven, and especially Tombstone. That was a big one for me in terms of really getting me to love the Western genre. Those were sort of the gateway into it. It kind of surprises me that it hasn't really made a giant comeback because it's so poised to be, you know, action and excitement and bloody and violent and stuff. It just seems like something that would appeal to audiences if done correctly. And we've seen a lot of recent ones that were done really well, like say the remake of 3:10 to Yuma that nobody really went to see, unfortunately.
So 3:10 to Yuma is one of the ones I was thinking of when I said I like the more modern ones. Yeah.
This was sadly sort of the tail end of the brief sort of renaissance in the 90s because you had like Dances with Wolves and Unforgiven were big critical hits. And then you had like Young Guns 2, Posse, Tombstone, Bad Girls, Maverick. There were a bunch of them. And this unfortunately seemed to just hit the end of the trend because it didn't do very well. And after this, you didn't see very many big successful Westerns.
But you saw a lot of very, very popular sci-fi.
Yeah.
We got into disaster films and Independence Day was out at that point.
Yeah, disaster films in particular with like Twister and the volcano movies and everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Westerns just kind of hit their end, unfortunately. And you'd get a couple attempts like that American Outlaws one and Texas Rangers where they were trying to market them toward teens with like, you know, James Vanderbeek and stuff. And you'd see examples, but they never really hit big again, unfortunately, which I think is kind of a bummer.
The movie this reminds me the most of, as far as 90s Westerns, is Desperado.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Which is another Western I actually like.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, same. And it's not a period piece, but it's still very much a Western. It's hyper stylized. It's got the same sort of like gunfight and everything in it. And that came out the same year, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
95. Yeah. So that was another one, like they just kind of at the tail end of it.
And Rodriguez is such a student of Raimi. You can see how much influence he had on his particular filming style. In that case, it was more of a hit, though, because that movie was so damn cheap to make.
Yeah. But who knows? I mean, there is that Kevin Costner Horizon 2-parter coming out this summer, so maybe we will see a resurgence depending on how well that does.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does seem like the Taylor Sheridan stuff has sort of brought it back, at least for TV. He's certainly done well with that and sort of the modernized Westerns like Hell or High Water. I'm curious if the classic stuff goes. I'll admit I saw that Costner trailer and I'm like, oh, this could be The Postman all over again. But
yeah, I'm not personally excited for it, but it could do well and, you know, reinvigorate the genre at least temporarily.
We will see, yeah. In terms of Westerns, I feel like this movie finds a completely different little subgenre in that it's sort of a Western as a sports, or more specifically, a tournament movie. Sort of like Mortal Kombat or Enter the Dragon, but in Western form. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, so I had never thought of it that way until you brought that up. And it kind of blew my mind. It really is like a sports movie, and maybe that's why I clung to it more so than a lot of other Westerns, because I also love sports movies.
I think the location really plays into the tournament feel to it because it is so isolated, and the little town, it's basically an alleyway. So in, say, Mortal Kombat, you have environments that you fight in and then you leave, and that's pretty much what we have here.
Yeah, in like Mortal Kombat and Enter the Dragon even, there's like always isolation. Like you're kind of cut off from everything else when you're in this contest. This is all that's really around there. And you always set up these kind of colorful characters that the heroes are going to have to face, and then see them fight each other and see who dies and who lives. And I also like that most of the old classic Westerns would be building up into the big quick draw at the end, the big showdown. And this movie kind of gives you a showdown every like 10 minutes or so for a while. It's like, let's take the most exciting part of these movies and just put a whole bunch of it into one story.
Okay, it was a lot like watching BattleBots because all of these characters, all of these fighters are coming in with pretty fully formed stories of their own. We could have had a movie with any one of these characters as a co-star, for instance. But you have all these mini fights and then you get to the championship, and that's reflective of just about every sport. But for some reason, that just the destruction and the isolation, I think BattleBots.
And the trash talking. There's so much trash talking in BattleBots, and certainly here, and that's kind of part of the show. All these gunslingers are playing to the crowd and making themselves into these personas.
I think of like the NCAA tournament. It goes from, the round of whatever, 16, I think there's gunfighters in it. And then it goes, you get the Elite Eight, Final Four, and then the championship.
Yeah.
At the very end.
I mean, yeah, they even have that bracket structure set up on the chalkboard there.
Yeah.
And it's funny because historically speaking, in reality, there weren't that many actual like quick draw gunfights like you see in the movies. It's kind of a fictional invention for the most part. There would be a few, like famously the Earps versus the Clantons, for example, the OK Corral, or the duel between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt. But otherwise, this kind of thing is actually kind of rare in the real world.
It's rare in the real world, but in the film world, it has like the longest tradition. Our first narrative film was The Great Train Robbery.
Yeah.
In reality, most gunslingers and stuff would just wait until they could shoot somebody in the back to kill them.
Right. And that's what I've always thought was weird about this trope. It's like, there's no way this ever happened like this in real life, because people don't want to die. You basically have like a 50-50 shot of dying just for the glory of it.
It's sort of that myth of like the honorable outlaw who will stick to a code and they fight by the rules when they're going to face down somebody. And yeah, that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
I think the film sets it up so that you understand you're not in reality, though. I know I've talked about the environment, but again, everything is so stagey. Like, I could imagine most of this taking place on stage with minimal changes of scenery. And all of the environments are kind of perfectly old, perfectly rubbed out. It has that artificial feel to it. So it's divorcing itself from reality.
I also have to bring up one of the books I used for research on this was The Unseen Force by John Kenneth Muir, his amazing book on Sam Raimi's movies.
That's actually the book I was referring to earlier.
Yeah, he is a great critic. I love his stuff.
Yeah.
And he brought up something in there that I can't really gloss over, the idea of guns in this as sort of a metaphor for sex, particularly for like the male sex organ. Guns constantly firing off. There's a lot of the gunslinger talk in this, if you look at it in that context, has a weird, creepy sexual connotation to it, especially Harrod in court, where he's constantly like, doesn't it feel good? Doesn't it get your heart beating again? It's a little creepy.
So this is actually something I wanted to talk about was, I can't think of another film where guns are as sexy as they are in this movie. Like with all the close-up shots and like the sound of the spinning barrels. Everyone has like their own distinct gun. It's so much detail and attention is paid to it. It makes me want to just start playing around with a revolver and like flipping it around and practicing tricks.
Even that scene when the kid is displaying each one of these guns, where there's a story behind it and how important it is and what he did to make it even better. It wants us to just visually love guns.
And just the shine on them, they're all chrome plated and beautiful. And guns make me uncomfortable, but I'll admit watching this, it's like, that's a very pretty gun.
Exactly. I'm like, well, maybe I don't need to get like a new gun, but having an old like 1800s 6-shooter might be kind of cool to have.
And I did read that this is one of the few Westerns where they really strove for accuracy in terms of all the guns that you see in this movie would have actually been around at that time. And like the conversion of some of the old ball and cap guns into like 6-shooters, that they really tried to be as accurate as possible with this one, which is kind of strange considering, like you said, it's so stylized and bizarre, but that's the one part they really tried to get right.
It makes sense,
Weird.
especially if thematically the guns were that important. Why not do it up?
Yeah.
It's kind of like casting an amazing cast, right? So if it's a movie about guns and about gunplay, why not have the best?
We also have to discuss this as what it obviously is, an homage to spaghetti westerns, which apparently was a lot of the problem for audiences. They didn't get that it was sort of spoofing spaghetti westerns and took a lot of it at face value and just couldn't get why it was so silly.
That's just not having the visual language. And I admit I would have gone into it without knowing what the visual language of Western is. So I think some of that would have gone over my head at the time. But knowing a little more about it, I do appreciate the effort put in.
Yeah, so much of what would otherwise come across as over the top, but like, the zoom ins on eyes and stuff like that. And the zooms in general, it's not something you'd see in a lot of movies at that point, but Raimi just goes for it with this. That wonderful, dirty, brown tinged look that the movie has. And just how it kind of wears its emotions on its sleeve in terms of it is very operatic and melodramatic and silly. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about it.
Raimi doesn't pull back on his style, and the movie does not suffer from it at all. It actually helps quite a bit. I think if this had been shot by a different director, it would not have been so much fun.
I don't think this movie works with anyone other than Sam Raimi.
Yeah, somebody who tried to kind of play it more straight and reserved, it just wouldn't have worked.
And it is a very, very visual movie. I was going to listen to it so that I could, quote it if I needed to. But as far as dialogue goes, it's not super helpful. It is a very visual movie.
So let's talk a little bit about Raimi, because it occurred to me that I think this is the first time we've done any of his movies on this show. And oh my God, he's one of those directors that has so much energy, and it kind of bums me out to see a lot of times when he tangles with the studio system, how much that energy is kind of pushed down and pushed away. But here it's in full force and it's wonderful. This was actually one of his first big studio movies. I mean, he had movies released by like Universal Pictures like Darkman and Army of Darkness, but mostly those were sort of pickups where he was allowed to do his thing. But here he's working with big actors. I mean, like Sharon Stone and Gene Hackman. So I've read how he kind of had to be a people pleaser and deal with the studio and deal with all these big egos on set and still sort of make the movie he wanted to make. And I think he actually did quite a good job with that, considering.
Oh, yeah. And going back to his style and how just over the top this movie is, I really think this is like the most Sam Raimi of Sam Raimi movies.
I think so. It's like, for me, it's this and Darkman, and I think this gets the edge.
Yeah, especially during the shootouts where it's like Dutch angle, quick zooms, constantly cutting from close-up to close-up, the POV shots looking down the barrels of guns. It's ridiculous, honestly. And I can see how that could be a turnoff for some people. I love it.
I don't know this, so I'm going to ask, does he edit his own work or have a dedicated editor?
I think he usually had a dedicated editor. I'm not sure if he was allowed to use the same guy for this one, because I know the studio made him take on a lot of their people for things, like Alan Silvestri as the composer. I'm not sure in this particular case.
Just the partnership between a director and an editor can just lead to magic. So I was just wondering, because it just tells me that his directorial style is really firm. Like, this is what we're doing. We're cutting at this kind of point.
Considering all these quick draw shootouts, it could get very monotonous, and I like that he doesn't really use the same style for any of the fights. He keeps changing it up, and he actually does things that are characteristic. For example, when the first big one we see with the kid shooting off with the Swede, I notice with the kid, he keeps using zooms, but he will add something different to it. Like for this first fight, it's that canted angle thing that Raimi does so well, where the camera kind of tips to one direction. And then when the kid is fighting Herod later, instead he uses the dolly zoom. And in both cases, it feels like he's trying to capture the kid's adrenaline, that he's, how much fun he's having with this and how excited he is at this. Meanwhile, in Court's first fight, everything's in slow motion, which seems to me to suggest how Court perceives a gunfight, and why he's so fast is that everything kind of slows down for him. And that's where he hears the strike of the clock for the first time.
He's Quicksilver.
Oh, there you go. He's the characters in Dredd when they use that drug.
The slow-mo drug.
Yes.
Meanwhile, like the lady's first gunfight, so much of it is shot in POV as she's getting into position to shoot it out with Kelly, letting us get into her head and see how nervous she is. All of these choices, they're not just random, they're rooted in character, which I think is really smart.
Yeah, I don't think Sam Raimi gets enough credit for his attention to detail in that manner. Like, I feel like he's often looked at as kind of like a style over substance director, and I think it couldn't be any further from the truth. He uses his distinct style to add to the movie.
Yeah, like one great rack focus shot I absolutely love is when they bring Courtney into the bar and Herod kicks the chair over for him to be strung up, and you get that great rack focus from the chair to the lady in the background staring at it in horror. And the first time you see it, you don't know what the big deal about that shot is, but once you know what she's been through in the past, that shot takes on such a different meaning. There's a lot of stuff like that in this movie that plays so well the second time in terms of the visuals.
It is a movie that plays better on a second viewing, definitely, especially with Ellen, the lady. In the beginning of the movie, when she comes in and she's kind of crouched into a corner and looks nervous and upset, I'm like, why is this character doing this? This makes no sense. She should be a lot stronger the way she came into the movie, immediately beating some guy up and tying him to a wheel. But knowing at the end of the movie what's going on, coming back to see it, it's like, oh, that makes sense. And it brought more to the movie on a second viewing.
Which is, again, not something you might expect from a silly Western like this one.
No, there's thematically, visually, so much going on. I know I'll be watching this again soon and trying to pick it apart even more because I feel like there's a lot there.
One thing about Raimi I do want to talk about that I think a lot of people do kind of write him off as just, oh, he has a lot of visual tricks, but he's actually really, really good with actors too. And some of the stories from the set of this kind of bear that out. He has this thing where whenever he's on set, he wears a tie out of respect to the actors to show that, you know, he's taking this seriously. But he would have some trouble with, like, Gene Hackman, for example. There's that scene right before the kids' first shootout when Herod just comes out of his house, gives a nod to Pat Hingle's character, sits down, asks, what's the action on the kid? So Raimi came up with all that business for Hackman to do. He's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Why would I do that? So Raimi step-by-step convinced him by saying, all right, well, I need you to come out and give the nod because I've already shot a shot of Pat Hingle starting the contest because you nodded at him. He's like, all right, fine, I'll do that, but I'm not going to sit in this chair. Why would I do that? And he's like, well, because you're the king of the town. This is where you survey everything. He's like, all right, but why would I ask the odds about the kid? I'm not going to do that. But it's like, but later on, when people realize that you're his father and there's this relationship, that's going to mean a lot more. And so eventually Hackman relented and did absolutely everything that Raimi said. And Raimi was very proud of that. He'd show Bruce Campbell, look what I got Hackman to do when he didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that story up. Some of the stories about Gene Hackman and Raimi on the set of the movie, it's just, Gene Hackman really is just a curmudgeon-y old man who doesn't understand, like, Sam Raimi and his style and direction. It's just very clear. But it's nice that he relented.
And yeah, I guess he'd constantly be like, that's camera shit. I don't, why would you do that? That doesn't matter. It's not acting. But Raimi does care about the acting too. I mean, he puts in a lot of really great details for these characters that are important. Let's talk a little bit about how this project started. It started as a spec screenplay by Simon Moore, who might be famous from writing the original British miniseries for Traffic, along with some of the TV miniseries from the 90s like Gulliver's Travels and The 10th Kingdom and Dinotopia. And he wrote it as a spec script that he wanted to direct on a low budget until it got the attention of Sharon Stone, who convinced Columbia Pictures to pick it up for her. But apparently Moore found a lot of the production humbling because he went to the first read-through and he was really excited. And then comes Gene Hackman going, this script is crap. All these lines are terrible. We have to have somebody fix this. That's got to be really tough as a writer when you have these amazing actors show up and a lot of them are just like, yeah, this stinks. We need a real writer.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the finished film actually is pretty close to that original script. They eventually fired Moore at one point when he had to go out to take care of his girlfriend when she was having surgery and brought in John Sayles, who apparently all the actors wanted more stuff for their characters. So the script ballooned into this like 2.5 hour epic. And the studio's like, all right, it's gotten too far. They rehired Moore. He just came back, stripped most of that out and said, here's your movie. And they're like, this is perfect.
That is so typical Hollywood.
I know.
And like the executives, they're not even paying attention to what they're doing. They're just throwing money and hoping for the best.
That said, I'd really love to read what John Sayles put into the script because that probably would have been fascinating. I mean, I know he probably wouldn't have given it the attention to detail he does his movies, but even as like a ghostwriter, he does some amazing stuff. And I would be fascinated to know what that 2.5 hour one was.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's a very different movie.
It's probably a lot more serious, which wouldn't work,
Yeah.
I don't think. That would sound a little bit more like, Kevin Costner's Wyatt Earp snooze fest.
Right.
And I know Joss Whedon was brought in to fix the ending. And I'll admit, watching it now, I can see little ways where the ending was probably tweaked a lot in post-production. You can see where some of the reshoots are and things, but it still works really well. All right, so let's move into Sharon Stone as Ellen. I remember feeling bad because she got a lot of bad reviews on this one. And at that time, I was getting a lot of bad reviews in general, but I like Sharon Stone as an actress.
I think she did a great job. I don't see any real reason to negatively critique her on this one, so I'm surprised.
I remember everyone was saying that this kind of role with limited dialogue, it plays to her limited strengths as an actress, which that's just mean.
Well, for one thing, less dialogue means more acting because you really have to act physically.
Yes.
So that's harder. And she does a great job here. I will defend her on this movie.
The very first note I wrote down about Sharon Stone is she's at her best in this movie when she's not doing any dialogue scenes. She does such strong acting with her facial expressions, her eyes. The scene we just talked about when everyone's signing up for the contest in the bar and they bring Court in, every time they cut back to her at the table, she is so good and is conveying so much emotion just sitting there.
I like that as opposed to the later perceptions of strong female characters where they're just tough all the time, that she puts up that Clint Eastwood man with no name front, but we can see her vulnerability, like you said, how terrified she is a lot of the time and how disturbed she is by some of the things that are going on around her.
Since the movie has so much to do with female trauma, to not have that kind of full range of emotions would be a mistake. So bravo to them for giving her a fully realized character.
Yeah, it seems like a more realistic character.
Like in her first shootout with Kelly, you can see she is terrified, but she's trying to hide it as she gets into position and digs in. And when she shoots him, there's almost this relief, but almost like, oh my God, I did it. Oh, thank God. But she has to hide that and keep it under and still play the cool gunslinger. And she does a great job with that.
Yeah, I think she's great in this movie. And before we move on past Sharon Stone, outside of her acting, she also has to get so much credit for being the driving creative force behind this movie.
Absolutely.
She fought to get Sam Raimi as the director. She fought to have Russell Crowe in the movie, who was unknown to American audiences at the time. She fought for Leonardo DiCaprio. She really did help shape this movie.
I mean, she was the one who was interested by the script and got Columbia to buy it for as a vehicle. And I think part of that was because she realized sort of the sex symbol thing that she was stuck in with Basic Instinct, and Sliver was kind of limited and she wanted to branch out and do something different. And I think that was a really great move on her part.
Yep.
One thing about her character I thought was interesting, especially going back to the original script. In Moore's original script, it's very carefully set up so that Ellen never actually kills anybody. Like, she wounds Dog Kelly. In the original script, that shootout with the gross guy, Eugene, when he comes back in the bar to kill her, it's actually the kid who shoots instead of her. And even when it comes to Herod in the finale, she wounds him, but it's the rest of the residents of Redemption who actually blow him away in the end. And I kind of respect that they threw that out and no, she's got to kill somebody. She's got to kill Herod. She's got to get her hands dirty, frankly.
Exactly. She has to transgress. She has to become what she's fighting against. And that's one of the reasons her character had to go at the end, because why would she want to stay in all those negative memories in the place where she's shed blood? She's probably off somewhere trying to get it out of her mind.
Yeah, and if she doesn't kill Herod at the end, she doesn't have a complete arc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels kind of hypocritical to me for a movie that's letting us enjoy these gunfights to kind of take Court's thing of no, violence is bad, don't let it corrupt you. It's no, we want to have fun with this. We want to see the bad guy get shot. Come on.
The two characters who are a little about using a gun, Court and the lady, they both have to use the gun because they have to become like the other people who are fighting. And they're fighting against their baser natures. Because, the lady is dealing with rage, revenge, fear, all of these emotions that have to go somewhere. And, of course, Court has to face his past by becoming what he was.
I think Sam Raimi put that as one of his things, you must shed blood to become a man, was one of his edicts for the Evil Dead. So it fits here too.
Is that what he was telling Bruce Campbell?
I think so.
All right.
Well, that
all
when he
these
wasn't
years,
whacking him with things and throwing things at him.
That's the drawing of blood.
That's true.
Yeah.
A little touch that I loved watching it this time, the nice echo that both the kid and Herod try to put their hands on the lady, and she just very gently grabs their hand and flings it off in both cases, as diplomatically as she can in that situation.
I especially love when she does it to the kid in the bar, when his hand is on her leg, the way she just like delicately picks it up and tosses it. Oh, it's so perfect.
With him, it's almost like, oh, this guy's harmless, but just sort of annoying. With Herod, you can tell it's like, I don't want this guy touching me.
Well, she has a trauma history with Herod, so it would make sense that she'd react stronger to him touching her. But with the kid, she sees him exactly for what he is. He's a kid, and he doesn't know any better. So she's like, no. And because he is the kid, and he's handsome, and he's young in this little town, she knows he's getting a lot of attention. And she wants to kind of bat him down a little bit. Like, not every girl wants you.
I'm also kind of fascinated by the big gap in her history where, like, you have to imagine that she was off somewhere learning how to shoot perfectly, learning how to make up for, what she couldn't do for her father in terms of being able to hit that rope and save him. And there's the trauma of that she's actually the one who killed her father and how horrific that must be. And I can't help but think there's kind of a self-destructive element to her character coming back and doing this.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more there. Given the rest of the movie, we can assume she's also been assaulted several times, at least. We don't know what drives her away, if she ran away, how she got away, but she did. But you can't leave that stuff behind. And murdering your dad because you were forced to, basically, and being assaulted. I mean, she takes it out on the whorehouse. She just blows it up. In a way I love, but yeah, she's coming from a place of trauma and she's trying to get revenge to exercise her own guilt.
There was one line from the script I kind of wish they had kept in there where when she's talking to the doctor, the Robert Blossom's character, she's like, I've been everywhere and done nothing. That maybe for the longest time she was out in the world running from this and not confronting it until she finally turned around at some point and said, no, I have to fix this somehow. So let's move on to Gene Hackman as John Herod. And what perfect casting, because if you need somebody scary and intimidating, can you do better than Hackman? That guy just, as soon as he walks into the movie, he is just scary as anything. A lot of the actors supposedly were just kind of scared because it's Gene Hackman. He's intimidating. He's a legend.
He oozes menace.
And it's funny, the first time I saw this, I thought he's a little too much of an archetype, especially coming after Unforgiven, where he had this really fascinating, nuanced character. But watching it again this time, there's a lot of really interesting stuff to his character that makes him a little more than just like this two-dimensional bad guy.
All of these characters are archetypes, though. While they do have a lot of character and history, we've got the kid, the lady, Herod, who is a historical or biblical king. The place is literally called Redemption. So there are definitely archetypes very clear in the movie.
But fleshed out a little more than they probably needed to be.
Definitely, I mean, there's more there. There definitely is more to the characters, but with names that are literally archetypes.
That anecdote he has about his father being a judge who like made him watch hangings and then nearly killed him with Russian roulette, you get the sense it completely destroyed his sense of good and evil. He has no respect for the law anymore after that. And it's basically just, I'm going to do whatever I can that fulfills my needs, whether it's money, whether it's women, whether it's just I'm going to enjoy killing people, that's all he's been pretty much focused on.
Whenever we get glimpses into his backstory, it makes me almost hate him slightly less. You kind of feel sorry for him, and then you're like, nah, he's still a terrible person. At one point, there's no excuses.
No, I mean, I'm of the mind, you're an adult. If you haven't figured it out, it's your fault.
Yeah.
It almost feels like he's part of a cycle because he is sort of this corrupting influence. I mean, he corrupts the town, certainly, by bringing in all these criminals. We're told how he corrupted Court by bringing him into this life of crime. We see how his actions destroyed Ellen's life and made her into what she is, and serves as this terrible role model for the kid who desperately wants his respect. And we get the sense on a certain timeline would have become like him down the road. Every once in a while, though, Hackman adds these little touches that I think are kind of fascinating. Like, he seems to be really upset by Court, not just because this guy walked out on him, but the idea that Court is trying to be good. That really upsets him. He doesn't like the idea that somebody can turn away from this and be good again.
It's not just that, though. It's the idea of this young person that he brought under his wing and taught him everything he knows, more of a son than his actual son is. And he betrayed him by basically becoming the enemy.
That speech where he's like, a killer's a killer. There's no shame in that, but he doesn't like what he sees as the hypocrisy. And yet this is the same guy who will also say prayers right before the big final gunfight.
Well, honestly, in that moment, I think he was just covering his bases. He wears a tie pin that's a lucky horseshoe. I mean, this man has a lot of superstition.
And the little detail of in that final showdown with Court where you can see his hand is shaking over the gun, like he actually is scared for once. And he's kind of enjoying it, but I think he's also doesn't like this sensation that he could be beaten because he's always been about, I'm number one. No one can ever bring me down.
And there's a foreshadowing to that when we first see Court in the bar and Herod asks him, "Are you still fast?" And he says, "Faster than you." And there's this very slight look of distaste on Herod's face where you can almost see him being like, "Yeah, you are faster than me and I don't like it."
At the same time, there's that weird line where he's like, I've always wanted to face you, Court, ever since we first met. And if he took him under his wing, this idea that maybe he was kind of creating Court to be an equal just so he could face him someday and prove that he's number one. Like maybe he's so bored with things, like he says, that nothing scares me anymore, that he wanted to make somebody he could be scared of just so he could conquer him. Almost like Ahab and Moby Dick. I wanted to prove that I am the best, so I'm going to create my enemy just to see if I can actually defeat them.
Yeah.
And the way Raimi shoots Hackman in this, that first shot that we see of him out the window as he's coming into the bar, where it's almost like shooting a monster movie, where you don't quite see the monster 100%, and then you just see his feet, and then slowly you finally get the reveal of Hackman. It just gives him this extra gravitas. He just seems so powerful and scary.
And the ominous clanking of his spurs. Yeah.
If Hackman didn't really think much of the script or Raimi's direction, he never lets it show. He is a pro. He's one of those guys who, like Robert Duvall, who he says something on screen and you buy it. You totally believe that he is giving his all here.
Yeah, he shows up, he does his job.
He is not phoning it in.
Yeah.
I also think of that scene where he's facing off with the kid, like, "Don't try to stare me down." I can't imagine as an actor even pretending trying to stare down Gene Hackman. That would scare the hell out of me. Man, I miss him. I wish he hadn't retired. I know Welcome to Mooseport wasn't a great movie, but...
It would have been nice if he went out on something else.
I kept hoping he'd come out of retirement and do one more with Clint Eastwood again or something. Just something, because, I miss him.
Honestly, I would like to see him do another Wes Anderson movie.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, I was just watching a little bit of Superman the movie again, and just how hilarious and fun and different his Lex Luthor is compared to this character.
Yeah, and they're both so believably evil in their own way.
All right, so let's move on to Russell Crowe as Court. Like a lot of American audiences, this is the first thing I saw him in, and I was definitely impressed and finally got to see some of his Australian stuff after this. And I'll admit, you can hear the accent coming in quite a bit in this movie. He's done better at hiding it, but he is really great.
So my most recent rewatch of it yesterday was the first time where his accent slipping through actually kind of bothered me. It just was so noticeable. But otherwise, I mean, he's so handsome. He has so much presence.
He's so dreamy.
He pulls off the fluffy 90s hair. That's kind of tough.
That is really difficult. Even DiCaprio couldn't pull off the 90s hair.
Yeah.
It's a very understated performance from him. I love his soft-spoken, slow dialogue delivery. It's so believable as like an 1800s preacher. Like there's just something about it. It's like, yeah, that's probably exactly what they would be like. I doubt they would look like that, but I do believe him.
And also, like so many of the other characters, he's got two things going on. He has this cool, I forgive everybody, peaceful, pacifistic sort of preacher exterior, but we can tell that he is pissed off at everything that's happening to him, what's been done to him, what he's being made to do at Herod, at everything that happened in this town. But he has to keep that under the surface, and yet it keeps crawling out the longer the film goes on and he's in more of these gunfights. Also, the way he plays that scene in the gun store with DiCaprio showing off the guns, I looked at it as almost like he's playing it like a recovering alcoholic who's now in a bar surrounded by drinks. That he just keeps looking at them and like out of the corner of his eye, and you can see his fingers twitch like, oh, I really want to get my hands on that. But he knows he can't do it and he's not supposed to do it.
Yeah, and like he never gets too close to the case or the counter. He's always kind of looking from afar until he gets handed a gun. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
And I love the way Raimi shoots that it's a close-up of the hand spinning the gun and doing all these amazing moves, and you assume it's a stand-in, and then Crowe lifts his hand up so the gun's next to his face so you can see, oh no, it's actually Russell Crowe doing all this stuff and able to do it really, really well. I don't know if he trained in that just for this, but it's really incredible to watch. I also love how after that, when he is finally brought to the counter, you can see him just reach out and tap one of the guns, almost just like teasingly, like a little tap, and then immediately pull his hand away. Like he just wants to feel what that gun feels like again for a second.
Like an addict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in that first duel, when he shoots, he looks down and he looks as surprised as anybody that he fired. He's like, oh my God, like it was a reflex. He didn't even actually mean to do it, but he did it.
And I also love, like, I think he's the only gunfighter that doesn't raise the gun up when he shoots. Like, it always stays at waist level.
I think Keith David does the same because he has it kind of rigged into something on his hip. But otherwise, yeah, he's the only one who does it that way, which feels, again, very professional and real, what a real gunfighter would do.
Yeah, you're not going to take the time to raise the gun. You're just going to point and shoot.
Then I think it shows just how much more natural it is for him than most of the other contestants.
I also have to bring up his priest garb, his outfit, his costume. Kind of cool looking for a priest. That weird cassock thing he's wearing is kind of stylish.
Yeah, and it looks good, all dirtied up. That's the other thing with most of the characters in the movie, but him especially, like, every time he's on screen, my mouth feels dry. I start being thirsty for water. Like, I feel like my skin is cracking. It must suck being him in this movie.
He takes so many punches and hits and to the back of his head and smackdowns. It's like, oh God, how is this guy still moving?
That scene with him trying to grab the water when it's just out of reach.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Like, no exaggeration, that scene is kind of heartbreaking.
It is. It's a mini little heartbreak.
And then his reaction when it's raining and he's just like a little kid with his mouth open, like, give it to me now.
And that's like the first time you see him smile and look happy in the movie, and it's like just because he got some water.
Couple interesting things. Apparently, Stone regarded Crowe as her favorite on-screen kiss, which is kind of ironic considering the scene that happened is actually cut out of the movie.
Yeah.
Apparently, she wanted to cast him based on seeing his performance in Romper Stomper. She felt he was completely fearless in that and fearless as an actor.
And Romper Stomper is such a good debut for an actor like Russell Crowe. So I can totally see why, seeing that, you'd be like, I want that person in this movie.
And again, the canniness of picking him up just before The Insider happened and Gladiator and all these other things that propelled him into stardom. It's like, again, really smart on Stone's part. Guess who was considered for the role but didn't get it originally? Liam Neeson, which, considering he'd worked with Raimi on Darkman, that's interesting. And he's played a bunch of priests. I could imagine him doing it. I don't think it would have been as good as Crowe, but Neeson would have been interesting.
It would have been a very different version of the character. I feel like it would have leaned more heavy on the religious side.
Also, the problem is Neeson is really tall, and I think he would have been too intimidating looking, especially standing next to Gene Hackman.
That's what I can't get over. He's too big.
So let's move on to Leonardo DiCaprio as Fiend, aka the Kid. He is really charismatic as hell in this. He's kind of sleazy, but he's so much fun.
He's great at that boyish charm.
And again, showing this vulnerability underneath it, that behind all of this bragging and how cocky he is, he's just this kid who wants his dad to notice him.
I think he has one of the more tragic character arcs in the movie because of that. He's entering this contest where he could very well die just so he can eventually get into a shootout with his father because he wants his father to acknowledge him.
The original script made it much more about the kid wanting to be the mayor and take his place, but I like that that's toned down so it literally is just he wants Herod to acknowledge him. He wants his dad's respect. And that he's willing to die to get it, possibly.
And he also has one of the worst names I've ever heard, so I had to look it up.
What, Fiend?
Fiend. It's a terrible name.
Really
but
is.
Apparently it's a Middle English word that's a nickname for a happy or good-natured person.
Ah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Given that it's such a weird name, I had to look it up. It fits his character perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally forgot that we actually found out his first name in the movie until we watched it again.
Yeah, so it wasn't until I saw it written down as Fiend that I realized when he introduces himself to Ellen that he says, my name is Fiend. I always thought he said, like, I'm a fiend or something. Like, I had no idea he was actually saying his name. Nothing I'd ever heard before.
He's the kind of guy, I believe, where he's like, everyone calls me the Kid. It's like, no, you started calling yourself the Kid, didn't
because
you?
Fiend is a terrible name.
Fiend's a terrible name.
I would also change my name. I have changed my name.
But he also seems to be the kind of guy who wants to immediately establish his Western legend. I'm the kid. I'm like Billy the Kid. I'm awesome. I'm cool. And he keeps throwing down these stories about how I shot Flat Nose, whatever his name is. Again, he's trying to build up his reputation, kind of like Ace, except in this case, he has some talent to back it up.
You know, it's a little interesting because he's trying to mythologize himself. And I keep connecting this movie in my brain with Mad Max and the idea of a stranger coming to town with a mission. And it's very Western, but the two movies connect for me in that way. The mythology of this person coming in, and you know, when she's gone, there's going to be stories about what she did for generations.
Absolutely. I mean, Max is so much rooted in those classic Western tropes.
And Fiend and the kid are such a part of that story. But the tragic part of it is that the kid is not the star the way he wants to. Even in his own mythology, he's not the star. She is.
And oh my God, his death scene, I give DiCaprio and the filmmakers credit for letting it be as sad and pathetic and messy as it is. Every time I see it, it can't help but affect me. It's so grim. It's supposed to be his moment of victory. And even as he's laying dying, he's like, did I get him? And she says, you got him. Like, is he dead? And of course, he can't have that moment of victory. Herod has to stand over him and not even acknowledge him in that last moment.
Yeah, and then his last line as DiCaprio's dying is, it was never proven that he was my kid.
It's like, you could have let this kid at least die with some semblance of peace. But
I think he's lying to himself.
He's definitely lying to himself, yeah.
Yeah.
But he could have at least acknowledged him just for the kid's sake. But no, he still denies it right up to the moment.
So I'm not saying that any of these characters are innocent, but Herod in the Bible was known for the slaughter of the innocents. And you can think, in a way, this child, the kid who has grown up under the shadow of this awful person and is trying to impress him would, not be innocent. But the competition itself could be considered that kind of slaughter.
And notably, Herod actually did kill some of his own children who got a little too ambitious for their own good.
Exactly. So, Fiend, again, not the star of his own story.
Something beautiful I noticed that I think is the result of a deleted scene, because originally right before his fight with Herod was his wedding scene. But with that missing, I love the idea that the kid puts on his best suit to face Herod. That he is like, finally, he's really dressed to the nines. And you can see he's a little bit more elegant than everybody else in the movie. But in this last scene, he is looking as fine as he's going to. He's very slick looking just to get shot and die.
I do like that.
Yeah.
I like the idea that the kid would get dressed up specifically to meet his fate. Either way.
Yeah, I'm not sure which way I like it better, because it had never dawned on me, I guess, until I saw the deleted scene of the wedding, that the wedding was immediately before his fight. So it's like he gets married and 5 minutes later he's dead. That's tragic. But it's also pretty tragic that he gets dressed up the best he's ever looked and then just ends up dying. It's like both work, and I don't know which way works better.
Putting the wedding in would almost make it seem like I might die after this. I better get married now, which is also really sad and kind of creepy and a bummer for his widow. Apparently, there were some other people considered for the role. Matt Damon was offered the role but turned it down. David Arquette was considered, and this one's interesting. Sam Rockwell auditioned. If it wasn't going to be DiCaprio, I could totally have pictured Rockwell really hitting out of the park with this role.
Yeah, I'm not really into Matt Damon in this role. David Arquette, I think, would be great in this movie, but I think he'd be terrible in that part.
Rockwell, I think, would have been great, but I do think DiCaprio is amazing here. Also, notably, DiCaprio actually lusts after a woman who's older than him. What's DiCaprio's cutoff? What is it, 22, 23?
I have no idea. But
yeah, I don't. It's something gross like that.
He's basically dating his grandchildren.
Yeah.
I have feelings.
I really like the relationship between him and Ellen as the movie progresses, where it starts off where she kind of finds him annoying, she like flicks his hand away in the bar. And then farther into the movie, I almost get the impression that she kind of wants to save him. Like, she sees the good in him, and that if it wasn't for this town, he could be a good person. And I just think that's very nice. In a twisted way, I almost think she transitions from this girl he lusts after into sort of a mother character for him in a weird way. Yeah, and that was very notable in the deleted wedding scene. Yeah, that she's really happy for them both and kind of gracious toward him. And also the fact that when he lays dying, she runs right out there and tries to cover the wound and comfort him as best she can. Yeah. All right, let's move into some of the weird motley crew of gunfighters.
Interesting one here. It's a smaller part, but Keith David as Sergeant Clay Cantrell. As opposed to so many other movies where he plays these kind of pugnacious tough guys like in The Thing or They Live, I love that David gets to play it really cool and kind of laconic here. He doesn't speak very much. He doesn't really get rattled. He is like this pro gunfighter. I kind of wish we had a little bit more of him in the movie because of that, but he's awesome. I love Keith David.
Keith David automatically elevates any movie he's in. He's just one of those guys. And he has my favorite line delivery in the whole movie, my favorite line in the whole movie, when they're entering the contest and he says, Sergeant Cantrell, like, how do you spell that? And he takes this long drag from his pipe and then just goes correctly.
Yes.
Like, he's so, I love Keith David so much. That's one of my favorite moments in the movie.
Just that amazing voice he has. I love when he has his meeting with Herod, and by this point, it's kind of out that somebody's hired him to kill Herod, and he's like, I'm a businessman, I keep my clients confidential. It's like, now, do we have any business today? Like, he's hired to kill this guy, but he's still willing to make a deal like, do you want me to kill somebody for you? I'm willing to do that.
Yeah.
Or pay him off to not kill him.
I almost feel like he's the kind of guy who once he took this contract, like, nope, I got to see it through. Sorry. That there is this weird twisted sense of honor to this guy. I took the money, I'm going to do the job. That scene where he's like taking money from all these poor villagers to take the job. And I love that at first we're not sure what it is. That just that creepy moment where he kind of turns around, sees Ellen staring at him in like a POV and just shuts the door in her face.
I'd assumed he was kind of a lackey of Herod's and that they were shaking them down for more money. I was wrong.
I like how that's sort of a central mystery of the movie. Like Herod keeps pushing at all these people and you realize like when he invites Ellen over, it's not just that he's attracted to her. He's trying to figure out, is she the assassin? Is Ace the assassin? He's trying to figure out who the hired gun is. And when we finally find out it's him and he's just like, yeah, it's me. I'm going to kill you anyway. So
Yeah.
And while we don't get much of him, his death scene is so dispiriting because he does seem like this cool, unrattled guy that when he gets killed bit by bit with his gun shot off and then that last shot through the head, which is so cartoony and almost like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, but still so grim.
The hole through the head and the camera you just see through the head. That shot in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake is very reminiscent of that, where the camera goes through the girl's head in the opening scene.
I also noticed, though, the gunfight before that, unlike a lot of them, is actually very low-key. Like, the actual draw is just covered in this wide shot, and we immediately see that he's lost and Herod has won. It's not, like, played up with the pyrotechnics. It's kind of let just be this very simple, classic Western shot, and then boom, that's it. Next, we have Tobin Bell as Dog Kelly, and funny to see him here pre-Jigsaw, but in the 90s, Tobin Bell was like kind of, if you needed a creepy bad guy, he was the guy. You look at like The Firm or In the Line of Fire or even Malice, where the fact that they cast him kind of spoiled the mystery of that movie because it's like, Tobin Bell's hanging around the background. He can't be up to good in this movie.
I didn't recognize him in this movie at all. Whatever they did makeup-wise made him unrecognizable to me, and I kind of love that.
He's so grimy.
He is just
so gross.
Caked in dirt. His teeth are disgusting. Yeah. And his performance matches that, and he's just so disgusting and kind of demented. I kind of miss the backstory that he went insane because he ate his dog, his beloved dog, and that's why he got his nickname, but also why he's kind of cracked, and he's probably been out in the sun a little too long.
Yeah, and I liked that delete scenes. It made so much more of his character make sense.
Instead, he's almost like the first obstacle Ellen has to face. And of course, he is about as disgusting and sexist as you can get. So,
and his entrance into the bar, dragging the wagon wheel, is just laugh out loud funny. It's such like a Raimi sense of humor, but it cracks me up every time.
I did wonder, though, since he's not in the bar during the contest sign-up, did somebody sign up for him? Because you can see his name on the board, but we never actually see him in there.
Oh. Yeah.
I wonder if it's like, well, we know Kelly's going to be in on this, so we'll just put him on the board. Next, there's the great Lance Henriksen as Ace Hanlon.
I just love his costume. I was a little upset that he didn't have like a diamond in his tooth, at least, because the costume was missing diamonds completely. And that's my main quibble with it. Although I love his character. He's gross. He's sleazy. He's great.
He looks like he should be doing a stage show in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that he gets this grand entrance when he's entering the bar and we just see this long shadow that he's casting. And it makes you think, oh, this guy's going to be important. He's going to be a big character. He's a major threat. And then to have it be like, no, not really. He's just a showman.
And I like his card tricks, and I'm guessing that was actually Lance Henriksen doing them. His face is in the shot.
I have his biography, and he's kind of amazing in that he's an actor who, when he likes a part, he will go all out. He will like have costume and props made. He will go to these giant extremes to get into character and really get into it. And this was one of them. Supposedly, this was one of his favorite roles. So he came up with the idea for the long hair and darkening it. He actually had trick writer Rex Rossi show him how to do the flip off the horse so he could show it to Sam Raimi and go, "Isn't this cool?" And Raimi's like, "Yes, we'll use it. We'll put it in the movie." So that's definitely him actually doing that stunt. He had so much fun with this that eventually he started a petition, and so did the cast and crew, to save his character because they all thought he was so much fun.
That's great. I guess this is as good of a time as any to ask this question, but does this have like the greatest lineup of character actors of any movie?
I was wondering about that, especially in terms of ones who they got before they became big, like DiCaprio and Tobin Bell and Russell Crowe. It's just such a good lineup.
Yeah, and Keith David, Pat Hingle, Lance Henriksen, Mark Boone Jr. Like, these are all great character actors.
Robert Blossom, Kevin Conway, Gary Sinise, just off his Oscar nomination for Forrest Gump. I mean, this is a big cast in this one, yeah. And a lot of times for tiny roles, too. It's funny, the one that it made me think of was Silverado, because that movie has a ton of amazing people in it, sometimes in small bit parts.
Mm-hmm.
I did read in his biography, he also mentioned this funny moment. You can see it in the movie. When Herod is confronting him, Gene Hackman was supposed to walk up to him, and Henriksen's like, "No, wait. Gene, you should stay there, and I should walk up to you, because you'd be the kind of guy to wait to have other people come up to you instead." And Hackman had, okay, and did it that way. And then Henriksen realized, oh my God, I told Hackman what he should do in a scene. I directed Hackman. What kind of an idiot am I? He realized that could have gone really horribly wrong for him. On the other hand, though, he was right. It's better for the scene that Ace come to him.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was also given his wanted poster as a memento by Raimi after the shooting was done. He hung it up on his wall. And he really wanted to do a sequel where he would play the other three brothers, Spade, Hart, and Club. And, they would all show up and come to redemption to avenge Ace. You know what? I would have been down to see that.
I'd watch that.
I totally would have seen that.
Yeah. And in fact, if they released like a poster of his wanted poster, I would hang it up on my wall.
Henriksen's just great in Westerns. Like, again, Appaloosa, he's great in that movie. He's such a good bad guy there, too. Next, let's talk about Pat Hingle as Horace. Of course, Hingle would probably be familiar to most viewers as Commissioner Gordon in the Burton Batman movies. And I feel like he's kind of the best representative of how the Citizens of Redemption have kind of knuckled under. We see just how much this guy is willing to accept from all these people around him, to the point of his daughter being defiled by this gross, disgusting pimp.
And he feels like he can't do anything about it.
Yeah, that moment where you see him really wanting to grab the gun off Kevin Conway's shoulder and just being like, no, and eventually just angrily stuffing peanuts into a bowl.
I feel for him, and I'm glad he feels that way about his daughter, but he also is contributing to the really bad shit going down, and he's just complicit.
His opening line of just like, whore's next door. It's like,
exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. Like, I was going to bring that up later because that's actually my favorite scene, because there's been many a time I would have loved to have kicked a stool up from under some dude.
One bit of Hingle's performance I absolutely love, and it's a little tiny one. Well, two I got to mention. One is when it looks like Herod's been killed by the kid, and Herod gets up, and you see Hingle just go like, oh, God damn it, he's still alive. That just the deflation on his face when that happens. And the other one is after Ellen confronts Eugene and shoots his balls off. When she comes back into the bar and shaking, she's just like, drink. And he pours out her drink and just very understandably just says, thank you, and hands it to her. Like, he doesn't make it a big deal, but just like, finally somebody's done what he always wanted to do. I just love the way he delivers that line.
He plays I can't believe I'm saying this. He plays a good sad sack.
Yes, because I was just going to say, yeah, he says thank you, and it seems matter of fact, but he's not making a big show of it. He does not want to make waves, even though she stood up for his child. That's as far as he can go safely.
It's funny, speaking of the sad sack thing, apparently he was almost cast as the dad in Gremlins, but he brought so much pathos to it, it kind of took away from the rest of the movie, so they couldn't cast him. They're like, suddenly,
oh man, he would have been perfect.
The whole movie became about this depressing, sad failure of a salesman instead of little creatures. So they're like, no, we can't cast him.
That's the ultimate sad sack character.
Not the way Hoyt Axton plays it. He's just so bouncy. Let's move on to Robert Blossom as Doc Wallace. He might be familiar as the creepy neighbor from Home Alone, and he's so good at playing these creepy-looking old men who it turns out are actually nice and warm and allies to the hero. And I love how they play up that he is this ominous figure in all of Ellen's flashbacks until we finally see who he is. And he's kind of like, again, the broken soul of this town. He's the guy who remembers what it used to be before Herod showed up.
I got the impression that and this goes back to a conversation we were having earlier, I feel like he raised Ellen after her father died.
Yeah. I wonder if she had a little bit of aggression toward him for grabbing her and holding her back when all that was happening, as though she could actually do something. Because she keeps looking at him, not exactly with this fear, but just this like, I don't want to look at this guy. I don't want to deal with this guy.
I wonder how much of it was not wanting her identity unveiled too soon.
Or maybe somebody confronting her the way he does in the cemetery and actually forcing her to face this. This was actually Blossom's last theatrical role. He'd do like one little documentary film after this, but this was his last feature film, sadly. And then there's Kevin Conway as Eugene Dredd, who, even though he's not the big villain, is easily the most disgusting character in the movie. He's just like the kind of scum that Herod's rule over the town would bring. And at the same time, we see that he means absolutely nothing to Herod when he's like begging John to help him when Ellen's about to shoot him. He's like, you got to kill him, go ahead, kill him. That this guy is just completely disposable.
And I love when they're all entering the contest and the kid says, sign me and my friend Eugene up. And at first you're like, oh, he's, messing with his friend. But then as the movie goes on, it's clear like, no, they're not friends. He just wanted to sign him up so he knew he would hate it.
If the actor might look familiar, he played multiple roles in The Funhouse. He's a lot of the really sleazy, creepy characters in that movie, too. The Barker and the dad of the big villain of that one. He'd also be in Jennifer 8, One Good Cop, and he played a really scary real-life villain, Curtis LeMay, in 13 Days. He's actually one of the best performances in that movie.
13 Days, that's the Cuban Missile Crisis movie?
Yeah, he's the guy who's like, here, let's launch missiles against Russia. Yay. In real life, LeMay was just a scary, scary dude. Conway said his Rainey shootout with Stone was the toughest scene he ever had to shoot because those rain towers that they use, it's not just like rain falling on you. It feels like little needles, supposedly. So they had to shoot days in that. That must have just been like painful and nasty.
From what I understand, they're basically like fire hoses hooked up to sprinklers.
So it's stinging, it's cold, you're wet and disgusting, and then you have to shoot the scene where you're running around and then fall in the mud. It's like, oh man, that must be just really unpleasant.
And then you have to get your dick shot off.
Well, he had it coming. I love that she delivered exactly the right blow to him.
And I love the reveal of it, too. You can tell he's shot, he falls down, and then it shows where she shot him, and you just want to cheer.
Yeah, it's like he almost doesn't realize it at first. He's gearing up to shoot again, and then like, huh?
Well, this also brings back the gun to basically being the penis. And it reminds me a lot of what Frank Miller does in Sin City when he's basically as one of his characters saying he took his weapon, both of them, and that one of them was the genitalia. Yep. So it was it's very obvious that it's there. It's definitely a connection between the penis and the gun in this film.
Consequently, even if Eugene had survived this shootout, his life is ruined. The thing he lives for most is gone now. I also love that weird little moment that apparently was not quite a mistake, but when Eugene threatens to shoot Ellen and he does that weird psh, psh sound with his lips was apparently because Conway just did that with his mouth. He wasn't actually making any noise, and Raimi's like, we have to put something there because it looks like you're saying something. So Conway came up with the idea of doing the little psh, psh, and it fits the scene perfectly because he's just talking about shooting her. But it's such a weird, creepy moment.
Yeah.
Next we have Mark Boone Jr. as Scars, and he's so young here, he doesn't have the facial hair. I wouldn't have recognized him, honestly.
Yeah, as someone who watched, unfortunately, all of Sons of Anarchy, I'm very familiar with Mark Boone Jr., and I always forget that this is him in the movie.
I also saw all of Sons of Anarchy, and I'm still mad. That's a lot of my life.
And he's fantastic in that show.
Oh, he is, agreed.
No slight against him. He's amazing in that show.
I always loved him as one of Chris Nolan's stock company for a little while with Memento and Batman. I'd like to see him show up in more of Nolan's movies. The makeup job they do on him with that scar and the blind eye, he's so gross. And I love that his chief characteristic is he smells. He smells really, really bad.
And I love when we first meet him and he kills that guy and then he pulls out a knife. He goes, that makes, 18? And cuts another notch on his arm and then just chugs his beer and half of it spills all over his shirt. Everyone has such a perfect grasp on what they should be doing for their character.
Isn't there a Batman villain who does that?
Mr. Zsasz,
Mr. Zsasz,
right?
Yeah, there you go. And ironically, in the movie where Mark Boone Jr. shows up as a cop.
Yeah, the corrupt cop in Batman Begins.
Yep. Then there's Gary Sinise as the Marshal, which is pretty much just a cameo, but interesting casting there. You kind of need to establish that this guy is good and decent and this important figure. So who better to get than Gary Sinise for this tiny little part?
All I can really say about him in this movie is he does the job that he was cast to do. And they chose a person who could convey what the character needed to be without much effort, and that's what he did.
I gotta say, though, that wig is pretty rough.
Yeah, he doesn't look good. Does he have any, clear lines of dialogue, or is it all just, yelling?
He talks to Ellen.
He talks to Ellen, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Just that, this isn't your fault. Don't blame yourself for this.
Right, yeah. And then when he's, talking her through shooting,
yeah.
Right.
Which, my first bit of advice to her would have been, don't close your eyes when you shoot, please.
Yeah.
Aim higher.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to bring up Jerry Swindell playing the blind boy, who he doesn't get a lot to do, but I feel like he's almost kind of the Greek chorus of this movie, that he's always there in the background supporting the good characters in quiet, interesting ways.
And he's got a great smile whenever, a bad person gets killed or whatever. They will cut to him, in the crowd, and he'll just have, a shit-eating grin. I really like him in this movie, and I know we're not there yet, but of all the deleted scenes, I think the ones with him in it were the best.
Oh, I agree. The one with him, I think, definitely should have been left in, where we kind of find out how he ended up that way.
Yeah.
I love that he's this reliable kid, whatever you need. If you need a particular caliber of bullet, if you need red ink, he's the guy who can do it. And just that moment after Ellen comes back, and you see the doc and him kind of arm in arm, yep, we pulled this one off. It's such a nice little moment.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about the cinematography by Dante Spinotti, because, oh my God, this happens a lot when I watch movies now, but it's I watch older movies like this and go, see, this is what a movie's supposed to look like. This is a real movie.
The opening when Sharon Stone's riding on the horse, the mountains in the background, and then once we get more into the movie, all the shadow play, and it's gorgeous.
Everything is dusty, and it feels like you're going to get dirty just watching this movie. Dust is going to rub off on you after you're done watching it.
The movie manages to straddle this place between real and fake. Everything is very artfully dusty, but you still feel that dust. You feel thirsty. So I really like that it strikes a nice balance between the natural. We're getting all these natural settings and the heat of the sun. And then, of course, the facades of the towns that look fake.
Even though it's not shot that way, every shot in this looks like it could have been shot at sunset, because the sunlight is just that strong and glowing orange. It also has some of the prettiest split diopter shots I've ever seen in a movie. This is one of the few where I can't see the line that splits the two areas of focus. It almost looks like deep focus photography instead. That amazing shot of Sharon Stone talking about how, some people deserve to die as Gene Hackman sort of turns in the background.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up when she has those stupid sunglasses on. Yeah, and I love that shot.
Another one that I loved watching at this time is after the kid dies, that pullback that starts over the kid and we just see Herod in a medium shot walking away, and then it pulls back. It's revealed to be a crane, and it pulls up over the street as we see them carrying him away. And, his widow carrying his hat. That's such an incredible shot. It's so gorgeous. I don't know how they kept everything in focus for it.
They really don't shoot movies like this anymore.
You brought up that incredible opening shot where it's just this one long, incredible take.
And I love after Sharon Stone gets back up and she's standing over Tobin Bell, and it's her shadow, but you see the sun coming through the bullet hole in her hat. It's so good.
I love when she's going to run away and pushes open the barn doors to reveal the sky, and her shadow is, stretching out into the foreground. That's such an incredible shot.
Yeah.
And then there's the music by Alan Silvestri. Now, Raimi had wanted to bring Joseph LoDuca, his usual composer, onto the film, but Sony insisted they wanted somebody better known. And I do love Silvestri. It's weird to hear his style with the horns that we're used to from Back to the Future and Predator mixed with sort of this Ennio Morricone spaghetti western style with the guitars and harmonicas and stuff.
And the whip crack of the main theme. It's both parts the cheesiest part of the movie, but also the most fitting. It's exactly what you think of when you think typical spaghetti western score, but it works because it is supposed to be this homage to that.
Well, I do have to say, Silvestri has made me a believer in mixing strings and harmonica. You wouldn't think that a stringed instrument, a violin, a viola, a cello kind of stringed instrument would work well, but he marries both of those together in a way I wasn't expecting.
And that sad, lonely guitar whenever something sad happens is really great. He is one of my favorite composers in terms of how he uses brass. Like during Ellen's flashbacks, you hear that low brass and it brings to mind the music from Predator. It's so good. I also feel like I heard a little bit of Holst's Mars Bringer of War in some bits, especially during that gunfight montage. A lot of that sounded like a little bit of Mars in there. Supposedly, Silvestri absolutely loved working with Raimi, but as far as I know, they've never collaborated since, which is kind of a shame.
That's crazy, actually. When you think about like the type of stuff that Silvestri has done, it seems like it's right up Raimi's alley, too. Maybe not as much as Danny Elfman was, but...
Or Joseph LaDuca or Christopher Young, for that matter.
Yeah.
And then there's some deleted scenes. Now, one I read about that's interesting, and I'm pretty sure this was shot, would have been kind of a different intro to the animosity between the kid and Eugene Dredd. Originally, there was a scene during the Day of the Dead festival where there was like one of those mechanized shooting galleries, and the two of them would kind of face off in front of that, and they would also introduce Herod firing at them with a rifle from his house. And I guess that was shot. I don't know why they didn't use it, although I do think it kind of telescopes better into the bar scene anyway. But I wish that scene existed. I'd love to see what that would have been like.
Honestly, like, I hate to say it, but having watched the deleted scenes, I don't think we're really missing much. With the exception of the stuff with the blind kid, that one scene in particular leading up to, you know, the dinner between Lady and Herod, that one, it was short. That one I think could have worked in the film, but everything else I think was unnecessary and would have slowed it down, especially the scene between Court and Lady in the whorehouse.
Yeah, the big love scene.
That was so unnecessary.
It really didn't fit, and I love by cutting it out, they don't have a romantic relationship. They're just sort of equals.
They don't need a romantic relationship in this movie.
Like, I hate that they almost had a romantic relationship in this movie. The fact that they don't is what makes... She doesn't need a romantic relationship. She's a badass gunslinger. Like, don't give her a romantic relationship. That's stupid. She's there for a brief time to do her business and leave.
It also feels like, you know, with Sharon Stone in the movie, it would be expected, oh, she has to shoot a sex scene. I love that. No, they shot it, but we're not going to use it. I much prefer it not in there. It does bring up the question as to how Court learns her name, but I mean, I'm sure she could have told her at some other point.
Yeah.
He could have found out from the doctor. There's many other ways he could have found out, yeah. The scene with the blind boy revealing that it was Herod's thugs trying to make him dance and that the last thing he saw before he went blind was Herod laughing at him. It's such a grim story. I really wish that had been kept in because it makes his character even more tragic.
And I like that at the very end of that scene, Sharon Stone finishes his whiskey or whatever, and she's like, you don't need to be drinking this, because the whole time I was watching that scene, I was like, he's way too young to be this drunk.
And I love that she flings it at him, and the kid catches it in midair, so maybe he's Daredevil.
Yeah.
There was also an alternate version of that scene with the glass of water where Court actually doesn't make these insinuations about her and the kid and Herod, and she just gently pushes the water to where he can reach it. And I actually kind of wish they had done that. I understand they wanted to create some conflict between the two of them, but it seems a little out of character for Court to be so judgmental. I didn't really care for that version that's in the movie.
And it also seems out of character for Lady to not give him the water.
I mean, once he's being a jerk, I kind of get it, but...
Yeah, but even still, yeah. I'm fine with the way it played out in the movie, but it would have made more sense in the alternate take.
There's, of course, the wedding scene where we see Court marrying the kid and his girlfriend, Maddie Silk. I'm with you on that. I'm not sure if the movie's better with or without it, but it is kind of a nice scene.
There's nothing wrong with the scene. It just kind of changes the context of his fight with Herod, and I don't know which way is better. Although it did answer a question I've always had about this movie was Court the one that officiated their wedding?
Yes, he was.
Now I finally get to see, yeah, he was.
Apparently, counts as enough of a priest to do that. The last one, and this is interesting, is that apparently there were a bunch of different takes at the final shootout before they arrived at the one that we see in the movie. Like, originally, it would have been that after she shoots Herod, Ellen walks up to him as he's crying for help and offering money. She kicks him and starts to walk away, and then he reaches for his gun, she spins and shoots him. So it would have been a little bit more of a self-defense thing. I noticed watching it that as she's squaring up with him, you can see Court in the background and with his gun in his hand like he's getting ready to draw. So I'm not sure if they were going to try and do that thing where Ellen doesn't actually kill him, but Court does instead, so she doesn't commit murder. But either way, I'm glad they put it together the way they did. This supposedly was the thing that Whedon came in to fix for them as a script doctor. And I do think it works well in the movie. The ridiculousness of Herod doing the flip after he gets shot in the eye is so good.
Yeah, I love that.
I did wonder if him with his hand on the money, dying with his hand on his money, was like a kind of a little hint of that ending that was in the script where he's grabbing money and offering it to anybody who will help him out, and all the town residents just leave him to die.
And I feel like something like that's happened in a different movie too, but I can't think of what it is.
It does seem familiar, yeah. The legacy of this movie is kind of a bummer. Well, it's good and bad. It completely changed the direction of Sam Raimi's career, because when this movie didn't do well, he started to think, maybe all my tricks aren't really working. Maybe I have to do something different. And it was a couple of years before he made another movie. And his next one is A Simple Plan, which is like so completely different to anything he had done before. It's one of my favorites of his, but none of the visual tricks are in there. It's so much more understated and pulled back. And that was kind of his style for a couple of years after this, because you had that, you had The Gift, and then what is probably his least successful movie, I think dramatically, that Kevin Costner for Love of the Game baseball one.
Yep.
And it took a little while before he kind of got back into being the Sam Raimi we remember, slowly with the Spider-Man movies. And then I think finally Drag Me to Hell was kind of Raimi back at full force again.
Yeah, and I also love A Simple Plan, and I always describe to people as Sam Raimi doing a Coen Brothers movie, because it is very toned down.
He kind of has those connections with the Coens anyway, so yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, they're his friends, so.
But it was his way of proving that, yes, I can do things involving, actors and dramatics, and it's not all just, flashy camera work. But I like the flashy camera work too. Stone would continue to produce films that she would appear in and some documentaries, but she never produced another movie at this scale. This was kind of the biggest one that she did.
And it's clear that she just had so much passion. She put so much into it, and there was so much riding on it for her personally. And then when it wasn't a massive success, I'm sure it crushed her.
Well, thankfully, she kind of bounced back the next year with Casino, which finally proved to people, yes, she can definitely act. She's amazing. And of course, there's the further decline of the Western. Once this didn't make money, as we talked about, Westerns kind of started to dwindle out a little bit. And I still keep hoping they'll come back. As for some trivia for the movie, there's actually a bunch on this one. The movie is dedicated to actor Woody Strode, who plays Charlie Moonlight, the Undertaker. He only has like one line, I think, in the movie when he's sizing up Ellen and immediately guesses how big her coffin should be. Although I do love the touch that when the kid is coming out for his gunfight and everyone's cheering, the Undertaker's the only one who's like, oh, this kid's going to die. You can see that look in his eyes, just like, that little shake of his head. But Strode was a very prolific actor. He appeared in movies like The Ten Commandments, Spartacus, and several really great Westerns, including The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Professionals, and Once Upon a Time in the West, and Posse. So this was his last movie. The movie was shot at Old Tucson Studios, a Western backlot built for filming. It burned down in 1995 and was rebuilt and serves as a theme park as well as a shooting location. And supposedly they still have some of the set bits from this movie, like that foam fountain that Court is chained to is still there in kind of rather nasty shape, but it's still there.
Really? So I could go there on like vacation and visit?
I guess so.
And like check it out? That's awesome!
A lot of this set was built, but they used it for certain locations and certain angles. The same set was apparently used for like classic Westerns like The Gunfight at the OK Corral from 1957, Rio Bravo, and Tombstone too. So lots of great stuff. One of Herod's gun-toting henchmen is actually played by Sharon Stone's brother, Michael Stone. I think he's the one who has like the kind of Inverness cape and the long mustache, the younger guy.
Okay, I was going to ask which one.
He's usually the one who's like right next to Gene Hackman in any scene. He's not usually the one that's up in the building. A lot of the extras were employed from lists of unemployed people in Tucson, Arizona, as the filmmakers wanted people who their faces had character and looked like they had been through a lot. And this movie does have a really great set of extras with some really interesting, distinctive faces. Stone actually has a scar in her neck, the result of a horse riding accident in her youth. And when she was making this, she actually had her makeup team not cover it up. And so every once in a while, you can see there's like a diagonal red scar across her neck that really fits the movie. It almost looks like, a botched hanging scar or something.
And I'm guessing that also means like she did all of her own horseback riding and stuff in the movie.
Yeah, I guess actually she ended up adopting and buying the horse that she rode in the film because she loved it so much.
That's awesome.
The moment when Herod slaps Stone after telling her in court that they can't leave, apparently wasn't scripted. Hackman just did it, and Stone's reaction is kind of how she reacted in the moment. I'm hoping he didn't actually hit her from the angle. It looks like he just kind of mimed hitting her, but because if he did, yeah, it's great in the moment, but that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, no, that's messed up. That's not okay.
Frank Pilney, an extra on the set, actually died of a heart attack after a day's shooting, and Jonathan Gill, who plays Spotted Horse, did a Lakota ceremony on the set to honor Pilney. We do have to bring that up, the whole Spotted Horse character. That is one of the only real wince-inducing things in this movie.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah.
And with a little tweaking, you didn't have to make it that unfortunate. I mean, I know it makes him a weird antagonistic character, but at this point, the idea of a Native American guy being like, many white men are going to leave in coffins, I'd be kind of like, okay, good for you.
I think the problem is that he goes a little too far into satire on this character, so it plays a little bit more offensively than I think he meant.
Yeah, I think the issues with this character come down to his dialogue and the way he delivers it.
Yeah, that speaking in third person, spotted horse cannot be killed by a bullet. It's like, oh, man. I did notice it's also the point where the townspeople kind of get on Court's side because, all right, here's this priest that Herod doesn't like and we're not supposed to like. But on the other hand, he's shooting a Native American, so that's okay. When he's facing off with him, you can hear people like, yeah, God's on your side there, preacher. It's like, wow, they're finally on his side because he's facing a Native American. That's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah.
Famed gun coach Thelma Reed served as the armorer for the film and trained the actors who were allowed to take unloaded guns to their hotel rooms to practice. And the actors would often greet each other on the set by quick drawing on each other. They'd be like, hey, how you doing? And just pull their guns. Supposedly, because he wasn't on screen quite as much and he had a lot of downtime, Hackman turned out to be the actual fastest of everybody on the set. Okay, and now for the cameos. So, Bruce Campbell visited the set on break from Briscoe County Jr. I'll admit, because I was a fan of Briscoe and that was on when this movie came out, I really wanted him to show up in his Briscoe costume in the background for a shot. But there are a couple rumors about his cameo. Now, the commonly accepted one is that he would have been in the wedding scene, that there would have been this wide shot of the celebrating crowd and the camera would have zoomed in and there's Bruce Campbell. And that would have been his credit as wedding shemp. Campbell has told another story in his autobiography, and who knows if this is true because Campbell does tend to mythologize, that Raimi actually ordered him put into costume to solve a problem he was having with Pat Hingle, where Hingle wanted more for his character and wanted a scene where his character actually fought back. So Raimi's like, oh, I got an idea. So during the wedding party scene, he'd had Campbell play this guy who hits on Hingle's daughter, and then Hingle would just beat the shit out of Bruce Campbell, which, allowed Raimi to calm down Pat Hingle and make him feel like he was getting more for his character, and also allowed him to have Pat Hingle beat the shit out of Bruce Campbell. And supposedly it was never intended to be in the film. I don't know if this is true or not, but who knows? There's a rumor that Campbell's still in the background. Every time I watch this, I comb the extras in the background just trying to find him. I've seen a picture of what he looked like on set. It was like him with this bowler hat, but I've never been able to find him.
Yeah, I don't think he is.
I really want him to be, though.
I remember the first time I watched this movie, when they're introducing all the different participants in the tournament, I'd be like, all right, next one's going to be Bruce Campbell, and then it wouldn't be, and be like, all right, this one's going to be Bruce Campbell, it was, and then finally everyone's introduced. I was like, wait, Bruce Campbell isn't one of the gunfighters? Seems like the most obvious role ever.
How good would it have been to been Ellen's father as the marshal? That would have been amazing.
Yeah, I would have taken that even.
Yeah. The other cameo, something that really shows up in all of Raimi's movies, is, of course, the Oldsmobile Delta 88, the classic. Now, of course, there's no way it would fit in this film, but supposedly, that car that dates all the way back to the original Evil Dead, the story goes it was disassembled and the chassis was built into one of the wagons that appears in the town, so that the Oldsmobile is kind of in the movie somewhere. I don't know if that's true, and if so, I don't know which wagon, but that's the rumor.
I mean, that's something I can see Raimi doing that. He loves that car.
I know. I could totally picture him doing that. Okay, big questions now. What's everybody's favorite scene?
Well, I already revealed my favorite scene. It is when we meet the lady in the town for the first time and she needs a room. So Horace doesn't even look at her, just hears a female voice and tells her to go next door, whore's next door, which is awful. And I'm really glad that Sharon Stone's character was like, no, now you're on the floor. Now you can treat me with respect.
And I like when she puts down, her cigar, gently on the bar first.
She's very intentionally doing this. It's not a reaction, so to say. So it's not like she just kicked and did it. She very methodically did it.
And I love how casual she is afterwards. You got a room or what? It's like she's done this, she's taught him a lesson, now we're moving on. That's it.
At that point, she's demanding respect. Mm-hmm. So instead of expecting it, she's like, oh, you're not going to give me respect? Well, I'm going to make you respect me.
But also suggests she's dealt with this kind of crap so much that it's not a huge deal to her or not a surprise when it happens, but she deals with it, she stamps it out, and moves on. Peter?
I'm going to have to go with the dinner scene between Ellen and Herod. It's very intense. It's just two great actors, Sharon Stone, Gene Hackman, sparring with dialogue. When she starts untying the gun, and Gene Hackman is peeling and cutting the apple and giving his backstory. I can't take my eyes off the screen.
I think I'm going to have to go with Ellen's gunfight with Eugene, because it's this moment where all this boiling up anger in her finally kind of gets a release, and that moment when they're like in each other's faces, screaming at each other, and then immediately we cut to them in the rain, charging at each other, firing guns, barely even aiming. There's just so much rage on both sides of that one. It's just such an amazing scene. And that moment where she guns him down when he's re-entering the saloon and has her first kill and looks down on this guy that she's killed and is just so horrified by what's happened. And Herod's just like, she advances into the next round, that she sees how death is just it's nothing in this town and how much it horrifies her. It's such a great beat of action. I love that. Okay, recommendations.
I have 2 recommendations. One I know I've recommended before. Actually, I may have recommended both of these before, but the first one is The Legend of Billie Jean. And well, on the surface, there's not much of a connection. There is an undercurrent of female power and revenge. The other one is a little more thematically appropriate. My Name is Nobody. It's a Western, I believe, from the 70s, and it is not adhering to the genre as strictly as you'd think. So I don't want to say too much, but definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that movie. I'm writing it down right now.
It's a lot of fun.
She showed it to me last year. It is a lot of fun. It was cool. I was tempted to go with the Sam Raimi one, but I'm going to go with 2 Westerns. One is, if this one is sort of the spaghetti Western, this one from the 80s is sort of a throwback to the kind of classic Howard Hawks, John Ford Western, and that's Silverado. That movie is so much fun. As an amazing cast. Kevin Kline, Scott Glenn, Danny Glover, Kevin Costner in what I think is his single best acting role. He's so good in that. Brian Dennehy, Linda Hunt, Jeff Goldblum, just a huge cast, and it's very kind of black and white, good guys, bad guys kind of Western, but it's a lot of fun. And the other one is a bit stranger, and I think, like this one, a very unconventional Western, and that's James Samuel's The Harder They Fall, which was my favorite movie of 2021. I just had a ball with that movie. I'll admit it's a little harder to watch now just because Jonathan Majors is the lead character in it, and unpleasant as his real life thing is, he is great in it. But the supporting cast in that, Idris Elba, Lakeith Stanfield, and especially Regina King, who just steals the movie as this hair trigger henchwoman. She's so great in it, and it's got such a great sense of humor, and like this one is sort of not quite anachronistic, but it's doing an interesting sort of modern tweak on classic Westerns. It's a lot of fun.
I completely forgot about that movie until you started talking about it, and then I flashed back to the trailer and how much I wanted to see that movie. So I will recommend a Sam Raimi movie, and since I think this is one of his most underrated and underseen films, I'll recommend another incredibly underrated and underseen Raimi film, and that's A Simple Plan, with Bill Paxton, Bridget Fonda, Billy Bob Thornton. It's just like a small town crime thriller, and it is magnificent. It might be one of his best films.
I agree.
It actually is my favorite, even though it's one of his least characteristic. I love that movie.
It's not my favorite, but that's just because I can't let go of Evil Dead 2.
All right, that's fair.
But I mean, and that's just a personal thing.
Yeah, I think objectively it might be his best film.
Yes, I agree.
Any other ones or just the one?
I mean, I was going to say Desperado, but we already talked about it earlier. I think Desperado and Quick and the Dead would be a fantastic double feature.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Anything else to say about The Quick and the Dead?
I think I got it all out of my system.
Yeah.
I have to bring up the quickandthedead.net, which is this amazing fan site that's actually run by, I couldn't find the guy's name, but he was an extra on the movie. And so I
did not know about this.
He puts down a lot of his like personal observations of everything that happened on the set, interesting things that were like filmed but not used. It's a great site, has a lot of great pictures too. But definitely check that out. It's been online since like the mid 90s and is just all sorts of great stuff on there.
Yeah, I just went to it and it looks like it's been online since the mid 90s.
Yeah, it's not exactly high tech and web design, but there is some cool stuff on there. His like day-to-day diary of the shooting in particular has a lot of interesting nuggets of info. Okay, Peter, what do you have going on?
I programmed this movie for my Nightlight series at Cinema Salem. It'll play May 24th. And you can follow the Nightlight Instagram page at nightlight_Salem.
Alrighty. That ends our discussion, but not the conversation. If you'd like to have your say about The Quick and the Dead or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow me on Blue Sky at tlas.bsky.social. And you can check us out on Instagram at CinemaSpection. Did you want to drop any social media, or are you still good?
Hell no.
Our show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe. If you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review as well. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie soon. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen.